Welcome to another League video here on ModernNexus.com. My name is Ryland, also known as Holy Shamgar on Twitch, and today we're playing with some Living End. Something a little different than what we've been playing of late. I've been playing a tad on my stream, and I thought we'd go ahead and record a little bit with it as well. This list got, I believe, 17th, 19th? I can't remember now, at GP Birmingham a few weeks ago. I have not yet made a single change. Some of the unique things about this list in particular include the Vault of the Archangel and the white sources. I'm not convinced that's where I want to be, and I haven't had that be useful for me yet. I'd probably rather it just be a Cascade Wolf Run or just not have any colorless sources altogether. But we'll see. I'm still giving it a little bit of a chance here. I don't like to make too many changes to someone's list before I've played a reasonable amount with it. But that's certainly the biggest, I don't know, hole isn't the right word, but certainly the area I'd be looking towards to perhaps make a change in the future. We'll see if perhaps it is good or bad for us in this particular league. But anyone who may not be familiar with this deck is trying to cast a Cascade spell, in particular either Demonic Dread or Violent Outburst, to cascade into Living End, which normally you'd be forced to suspend. It has no casting cost, but this deck is constructed in such a way that nothing costs less than 3, so you will always cascade into Living End if there is a Living End that remains in your library. And then pretty much a large portion of the rest of the deck are cycling creatures to mass reanimate with Living End. These are all of our cyclers here, these 19, with some new ones from Amonkhet. This deck did get some upgrades, instead of playing things like Jungle Weaver or the 3/4 that shoots, it's red and green, I can't remember, shoots flyers. Cannot remember for the life of me what that's called at the moment. I'm sure some of you are screaming it in your head right now, but unfortunately I cannot hear you in the past. We'll work on that later. But another big point about what Living End decks are trying to do these days, Fulminator Mage is a big part of their strategy alongside Beast Within somewhat as well. Beast Within, of course, just kind of a versatile removal spell, as well as being able to hit permanents, of course, works well alongside Fulminator Mage. And Simian Spirit Guide, while being kind of awkward with most hands, accelerating your Cascade spell may not be a great thing. It really is situationally dependent. Sometimes it is something that you want to do, but it can be difficult to put a bunch of creatures in the yard unless you have a lot of Street Wraiths or additional Spirit Guides even, or what have you. There are cases where you're going to want to do these things on turn 2 if you're given the ability. But largely, Simian Spirit Guide quite good to turn to a Fulminator Mage, so you can still be on kind of the turn 3 plan and maybe refulminate them to make it very difficult for them to reach whatever out they may have. These 8 Cascade spells can come in handy. The biggest thing you need to know about them in particular, Violent Outburst being an instant is typically perceived as a better one. Also, it doesn't require a target, which is nice. So you can do this at the end of your opponent's turn to mass reanimate your board if you're given that luxury. Demonic Dread is a sorcery, which is a little bit more of an issue, but fortunately it does not cost green. As you'll notice, our deck is largely black and red, outside of some sideboard stuff and Violent Outburst and Beast Within. But Demonic Dread does require a creature to be in play, basically, and is a sorcery. And both of these sometimes will come up as the spell that they are. You don't need to cast Living End off of these. If you want to cast Demonic Dread or Violent Outburst, cascade into Living End and don't want to cast it, you're not forced to. So there are games where you'll stop something from blocking to finish them off, or pump your team to finish them off. So it's good to keep in mind that utility as well. On top of that, we've got a one of Karizev's Expertise, also a relatively recent addition, obviously. And that's in case you get a bunch of Living Ends stranded in your hand. You still have a way to perhaps cast one of them without waiting the 3 turns and paying the 4 mana to suspend it. And then the last thing we've gone without mentioning here is the Fairy Macabre. Kind of clunky as a one of. I'm not certain that that's what we want in this spot, but it seems pretty reasonable. Obviously, we use that to maybe exile, outside of being a traditional graveyard hate scenario, we'll use it to exile creatures that may have been put in our opponent's yards before we've living ended, and then also get the creature, which is convenient. And then our sideboard has Leyline of Sanctities, which is a little bit unique as well. You don't traditionally see a lot of living end lists with it, but I've kind of liked it so far. Some additional Fairy Macabres for more graveyard hate when that's required, or when we're facing decks that are going to be putting a lot of creatures in the yard as well. Shriekmaws for any decks that have problematic creatures we need to remove early. Obviously, you'll see kind of a lot of weird sideboard cards out of Living End for a couple reasons. A, they need to cost more than 3, so you'll see a lot of things like Evoke or Traps, or, you know, just discard this from your hand and it costs 3 mana, or stuff like that. Alternate costs, basically. You'll see Living End abuse that a lot to try and gain some productivity, obviously, without sacrificing the ability to always cascade into Living End. So yeah, because of that, we have Shriekmaw here as our kind of premier removal spell, since it only costs us 2 mana. Dismember, also an option, a similar option. Obviously, Living End prefers to have creatures do the job when it's able, particularly because you'll get them back when you Living End. It's important to keep in mind, though, Shriekmaw, not a May ability, so if you do have like a Simian Spirit Guide in your yard somehow, or a Ceradon, it will kill those things if you have no other target. So something to keep in mind. Ingot Chewer, similarly, is a evoke creature that helps us hate on artifacts, while technically costing more than 5, only costs 1 to do what we need it to do, and on top of that is a creature that we can get back. So good in any situation where we need artifact hate. And then we've kind of got just an additional Beast Within and a flexible Krosan Grip. Krosan Grip kind of nice here, since it's going to be costing 3 mana anyway for our disenchant. Kind of like that added split second for things like Relic and Progenitus in particular. Obviously, there are other situations that can come up where Krosan Grip is useful with that split second, but Relic, obviously, the kind of forefront of your mind when you're thinking about ways that this card will benefit us, in the sense that it has a split second. So that's kind of what we're looking at. I think I actually may have failed to mention a couple things about our cyclers here, though, given that they are not all equal. Ceradon and Horror being the most recent, as I said. Ceradon just being a vanilla 6/4, and Horror being a 4/4 that actually you can pump up with some reliability. It's quite good. Architect's Will being kind of the smallest and perhaps weakest in our deck. It might get cut a lot of the times if we're looking for stuff to cut and want to cut a couple of cyclers. Usually the Architects and perhaps the Archfiend, depending on the matchup, of course, may be the ones to go. Rarely do these ones get cut. It just depends on the situation. Street Wraith obviously is wonderful in that it costs no mana for us to cycle, just a couple points of life. And then Archfiend, one of the better threats to hard cast, but obviously more expensive cycling, so you'll typically see a lower number of Archfiends in Living End lists, but it's one of those sweet cards that you don't really mind hard casting, and more importantly, does something with all your cyclers, right? Similar to Horror, if you have Living Ended and have some of these in play, you can actually generate a lot off of them just with the cyclers you may have in your hand, which is certainly powerful. So that's kind of what we're working with here. So why don't we hop into some games and see how it goes.